Hi, my name is Matt Perez, and we are in rHatchery.live with Blake Hutchison. I think I'm pronouncing it right?
Yes, that's
And
right.
Jose's not going to be here today because of with all the rain in California and everything else. He doesn't have internet, and but Adrian Perez may show up in the middle of this, so don't be surprised if he happens. Let me start by asking you. I thought I understood what you did with Flippa and what's it called? Something entrepreneurship. Um,
Entrepreneurship. Yep.
yeah. Oh, there's Adrian.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
popped in. Hello.
And then I tried to explain it to my wife, and I messed it completely up. And so, what did you explain to us very slowly in big words? Uh, what is it that you do? What's your business model and stuff like that?
Yeah. So what you're referring to is what we call acquisition entrepreneurship, which
Acquisition.
is, in short, the ability to buy something that is currently operating, and instead of having to start from scratch, undertake 0 to 1, you are able to live and benefit from the cash flow of a existing business that somebody else has put their blood, sweat, and tears into before you've come along. And as a result of that, you have a greater chance of succeeding because you've got existing customers, you've got existing traction, you've got existing revenue. And so the chances of failure are far lower, typically. And not only that, it's actually an income source. So all of a sudden, you buy a small business. It could be anything. We specialize in digital and online businesses at Flipper, but in theory, it could be anything, right? So you could go and buy a laundromat that has been around for 10 years. That
Okay.
laundromat has a good income source. It's been operating for a long period of time. It's got a stable customer base. It's in a neighborhood where there's constant use. And you would buy that instead of starting from something from scratch. You don't need the same capital outlay. You don't need the trial and error. You don't need to run and think about the operations as you do tend to in a startup. You literally take it over from somebody who's already done a good job. And so that is acquisition entrepreneurship, and what we tend to believe is a more tenable path to business ownership.
Yeah, I could see why it's more of a live off investments off the cash flow rather than get a capital. But how do you buy the business to begin with? So
Yeah,
let's
that's a
say
good
a
question.
laundromat, which is maybe better understood. The owner would want some money for it, right? Or
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, I mean, yes, it still is to some extent, well, to a large extent, it still is a financial instrument, right? So it is an asset. The asset needs to be paid for, but assets come in all shapes and sizes. So rather than thinking about it from the perspective of M&A and mergers and acquisitions and
right.
big billion-dollar deals that we might see on the front cover of Forbes or TechCrunch, you think about it from the perspective of a multiple of cash flow or a multiple of profit. So they're not bought on the basis of skyrocketing valuations,
Right.
which have obviously rebalanced a little bit more recently, but still, they're still outside the realm of the average person. So let's take, for instance, our world here at Flipper. So you could buy a blog that is, for argument's sake, earning $50,000 a year. You could probably buy that for 2 times earnings.
Okay.
And yes, $100,000 is still a substantial amount of money. I'm not suggesting it's not, and I'm not suggesting it's within reach of absolutely everyone. But what that would mean is that I've got this asset that's been running for 5 years. It's consistently making $50,000 a year. I buy that asset for, call it, 2 times profit. I've spent $100,000 on my asset. The next year, I continue to run that. I run it at the same levels as the prior owner. I'm now making $50,000 on that. That's a 50% return on my investment in year one. In year two, my asset is paid off. And in year three, I now have a stable income source that I can rely on. And that, has proven to be a really, really safe bet for many, many people. It's not without risk, of course. Very few things are. We're not suddenly suggesting that, people who have never owned or even thought about a digital asset of any sort, we're not suddenly suggesting that they jump on our platform and start buying, because that would be bad practice. But we are suggesting that they are undervalued, underappreciated. We're suggesting that over the next 10 years, there will be this huge transition of businesses of all types, digital and brick and mortar and any other.
Uh-huh.
And that, there is a viable pathway to business ownership that is within reach of many people. And so that's what acquisition entrepreneurship is all about. We think it's a viable, sustainable pathway to business ownership. And therefore, what we say is owning your own future.
So then this is definitely differentiated from the startup world, where everyone's trying to get 100x in order to make the portfolio successful.
Yeah.
And it's definitely more understandable in a weird way. There's more legibility to that type of thing of like, well, it earns this much and I invest this much. Yeah. In the journey for making Flippa, did you ever consider democratizing the purchasing part so that people could buy fractional portions? If I'm understanding or not understanding correctly.
Yeah, no, you're understanding very correctly, and it's a really interesting segue. Yes, in short, we will enable fractional ownership. There are obvious challenges with that, mostly legal, compliance, and governance related challenges. So at the moment, to answer the question, Adrian, 99.9% of transactions are buying 100% of the assets.
Okay.
So there's no trading of shares. There's no entity sale. It's an asset exchange. But we've had a lot of requests for that. So you can have, for instance, let's say you could have a very small, you could have an e-commerce business, and that e-commerce business is maybe operating on Amazon. So it's a fulfilled by Amazon store.
Okay.
And, this is widely recognized as a decent business model. You get the leverage of Amazon. So you take more of the risk out of the logistics and the marketing side, and you put more effort into the quality of the product side. Now, we've had requests for people who have said, well, I don't have $500,000 at my disposal, but I do have $25,000. And so is there a way to buy into a syndicate, right, where someone takes the operational reins, that person takes a salary, but they're essentially taking a network of investors along for the ride. And so at the moment, we are undertaking some preliminary work with Securities Council just to be able to set that up. And so the way that will end up working, Adrian, is you'll have a special purpose vehicle. So that special purpose vehicle for the purpose of the conversation, let's call it Blake. So special purpose Blake is available, and we are raising $500,000 for the purposes of buying this particular asset. So the asset's there, the financials are there, all the due diligence is accessible. And now we have basically all three of us acquiring that asset. Therefore, you're actually distributing business ownership among an even greater.
Yeah, because I know the Jobs Act under Obama, I think it was Obama where it finally got done, made it so that, it was no longer like, well, you have to be an accredited investor with $1 billion in order to invest in things. They were trying to make fractional ownership possible. So then this vehicle ends up being the legal fiction, the legal framework that you need for like you said, syndicating a purchase.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
That's very cool. That's
the journey we're on. And so at the moment, you've got 6,000 assets for sale, but to be candid, unfortunately, it is a one-to-one. So it's Adrian selling his blog, his SaaS asset, his app. The good news is, remember, digital assets, though, they're no longer expensive to start. And so we believe that there is this extraordinarily big long tail of businesses that will be available for many, many people, of great diversity from around the world of different sizes. And so it should be that you can buy into business ownership at a lower cost than ever before. The best example I have of that is there's a gentleman in New York. His name is John Chen. Really interesting guy, and he bought his first asset on Flipper for $7,500. Right, so that's accessible for many people.
Yeah.
He worked hard on that asset. So I'm not suggesting you don't have to work. Of course you do. He worked hard on that asset. 2.5 years later, he sold that for $550,000. Right.
Oh wow.
So $7,500. 24 months later, $550,000. He's now done that. He's now done that 4 times.
Oh my! Wow.
And so the practice of acquisition entrepreneurship makes sense to a lot of people because they can actually assess something as viable from day one versus having to get to a point of viability over day 0 to 100 or 1,000.
Which is sort of a different skill set. At that point, when you become the owner, I'm not sure how you guys do it, but if I suddenly became the owner of something and it was sort of this more straightforward, non-startup type business,
Yeah.
I have to manage everything, or does Flippa help me manage everything? I'm not sure how does that manifest for the person who just bought?
Yeah, it's a great question. No, we don't manage it. So our entire mission is to democratize the exit and enable business ownership. So what we do is provide a marketplace where buyers and sellers meet each other, negotiate, and ultimately transact. We have all of the tools you need to get the deal done. Once the deal is done, you are on your own. You are the business owner. Now, what a lot of people do is they will tap into the freelancer economy and they will leverage themselves where they have a skill set, but then they'll leverage others where they have a diverse skill set that they don't have themselves.
Okay.
So for example, there was a gentleman in Canada and he started buying small content websites. They're essentially blogs earning income through affiliate revenue. Okay. So everything from GarageGymPro.com, which was an affiliate website for in-home gym equipment,
Oh wow.
all the way through to Yorkie's Passion, which was an affiliate website for Yorkshire Terriers, where they were essentially referring to Amazon to clip the ticket on dog-related accessories. Now, he knows nothing about content websites, but he's a relatively savvy person. And he said, okay, well, I can buy these. Each asset cost him between $15,000 and $25,000. So again, we're not talking sheep stations here.
So he gets, let me clarify, he gets the domain name, the brand, if you will. That's really what he's buying, because he's got to generate new content himself now.
Well, remember that a lot of the time, in the eyes of Google, these blogs have a position of authority. And so for many, many of the long tail keywords that are operating within the Garage Gym Pro ecosystem being home gym equipment, that particular asset was in the eyes of Google very, very positive and powerful. And so he is reliant on the history of kids.
He can make money from old content.
Yes. So he sits on the asset and he then picks up the revenue from the links pointing out to various sources where he can attribute and he has relationships with. So now that's not to say, though, that you don't have to continue to invest, right? But your investment is a function of what the business has previously done well.
Yeah.
Versus,
you start from a higher level.
And that's the really important thing, right? And then you get economies of scale when you own multiple of them because you can deploy the same staff base against multiple of them.
So how do you Flippa makes money?
We take a success fee. So if someone sells, so we do small things, we do big things. So when someone sells a $20,000 blog, we make 10% on that. So we take a contingency-based success fee.
Okay.
It's a lot smaller when someone sells a big thing because, yes, there are still big trades that happen. And certainly, we have a business model that is based on a full marketplace exchanging assets from as low as a couple of $1,000s to as high as tens of millions of dollars.
So you take 10% or less of the transaction.
It's variable, so it declines as the asset size grows.
Yeah.
But in short, to operate the asset, what you do is you go and find someone who understands content. So you go and pay an assistant on Upwork or Fiverr or something. And so you're getting away with a low-cost investment, and you're putting your own passions and knowledge base into the asset, of course, but you're leveraging the cheap resources you can get elsewhere to continue to run the asset extremely successfully.
How often do these businesses end up having a component where there are employees involved?
Depends on the size. Typically sub $100,000, probably even sub $250,000. They're sole trader businesses, so solopreneur.
Okay.
This is the great thing, right? Because we're in the world of side hustles.
Yeah. There's like a whole market for it.
And so, any one of us talking today, on the side, we might own a blog. We could have an e-commerce business. Maybe we've got a small SaaS app. Maybe we've got an iOS or Android application. Maybe we don't, but lots of people do.
A small 3D printing business. That's a 3D printer behind me. So yeah, I totally understand.
So the world of digital assets is very, very, it's a long tail, right? There are hundreds of millions of these things. And obviously some are worth more than others. So what we believe is that the digital economy and the world of entrepreneurship should not be the realm of an exclusive few that can tap into capital, that tap into the smarts of Ivy League graduated engineers. We believe that it should be democratized, as it essentially has been in many respects. But then better than that, we believe that spawns the next generation of business owner, because most businesses have a 3 to 6 year life cycle. And, Intuit will tell you that out of their cloud accounting software. They can tell you that the average life cycle is X. And as a function of that, we believe that instead of these digital assets just sitting on the shelves, every one of them should be given the opportunity to change hands multiple times.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, it's a really interesting approach. I couldn't explain it the way that you explained it now, but so I'm sitting here thinking. So what we're into, the whole thing about rHatchery.live and the radical model is co-owned companies. So instead of getting your power from capital, you get your power from contributions. Yes. So he contributes more, gets more, and he contributes less, gets less. And that contribution is not determined by the top guy or anybody, a judge or anything like that, but rather by each other. So imagine that we were to form a company, we would decide what you're doing, Adrian and I would decide is your contribution, and you and Adrian would decide what my contributions are and whatever is left. And so it's a dynamic thing. It's got many multiple eyes looking and stuff like that. But I would imagine that we'll end up with companies that are like this, assets that are making $100K a year, and not growing particularly, because that's not the point of it. The point of it is to live in a co-owned environment. And so in that case, let's say, I would say no, but you guys want to stay in the business. So you want to sell it and make some money, but you want to stay in the business. So how would that work?
Yeah. Let me put it to a couple of ways. One of the things that I personally had to realize coming into my role as the CEO was how global digital business ownership is and how variable the needs of our collective global citizens are. And so I had a discussion with a person in Croatia, and he had said to me, welcome to the new role, Blake. And all I was doing was I was speaking to a bunch of our community members to try to understand our platform and what they wanted us to do and work on and what they wanted us to improve. And he had said, do not get away with the lower value portion of your marketplace, because he had assumed that we would go up the value chain and continue to sell more and more expensive or higher value assets.
Right.
And so the point he was making is if he buys a $5,000 asset for his son, that $5,000 asset might actually be making $2,500 per annum.
Okay.
The $2,500 per annum enables him to democratize business ownership within his own family and
Yes.
give his son a livelihood from which to grow from.
Yep.
And so part of it is, yes, shared ownership and distribution of responsibilities. Part of it is given the accessibility of digital assets, actually democratize business ownership among so many more people.
Right.
Then you have the question that you've posed, which is, okay, well, how do you get distributed ownership, distributed responsibility, and shared benefit? We have absolutely seen examples of an individual who buys one of these assets on Flipper, but then ultimately distributes ownership among many, many. So, for example, there's been assets that have been a particular themes or niches. For example, crochet as an example, right? Where a crochet community was running a crochet blog. And so they're all contributors to that, right?
Right.
It's a blog, it's about crochet. It's essentially the same as Yelp. It's user-generated content. But the difference is it's about a particular topic where people have a shared passion and they each share in the revenue that blog produces.
Okay.
And that was done basically the user who bought this company, or in this case the blog that is this resource, then reached out to his community to connect them with that ownership as well.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, see, that's fascinating, because what we've been about is very much the democratization of ownership. It's like the ownership's fine. It's just we want people to be able, like, as you're speaking about this, I imagine a future world where you run into anyone and they say that they're an owner of some company.
Mm-hmm.
And they may have had companies bought from them and vice versa and started, it would be, right now, you talk to someone at a party and you're like, do you own a company? And it's like, well, if you're in the Bay Area, then maybe, yeah, because everyone's trying to do their startup. But anywhere else, the answer is no. I work for this other person. Yeah, they gave me a few shares of stock. But their answer is not, yes, I own a company. Even if they do have stock that technically is some fractional thing of ownership.
Yep.
And that would be really good. And it's kind of funny, you talked about that blog, and one of the things we've talked about is we have these platforms like Facebook or other things where people agglomerate knowledge. They agglomerate their resources and work together for free, usually. And they usually get no reward other than the connection they have with other people. Yep. And so, like, I'll elaborate more on what my dad was talking about, this sort of non-selfish assignment of assets. So when we were working on this book, you can see the book behind him in the middle of the screen, Radical Companies.
Yep.
He and I are co-authors of the book, along with Jose, who couldn't be here. And that, at one point, we come up with this idea for RADs. And the idea there is that everyone gets a single RAD, and that rad is a fraction of the profits of the company. But it's not like a co-op where everyone has a specific fraction of the pie, or an equal fraction of the pie. You have to give your rad to other people, or cut it in half and give it to other people. So at one point, my dad and I, it's just the two of us trying this, right? So it's kind of a silly academic experiment at this point, where every day we're working on the thing and I give him a rad that week, he gives me a rad that week. And it's going total equity, until one day I propose some idea and he steamrolls me and doesn't let me get the idea out. And he's like talking about it and not listening to me. And that day I don't give him a rad. And so it's not like you could give negative rads, but in this case, I gave nothing, that sort of thing. And it immediately started a conversation. Because the next day he's like, why didn't you give me a rad? Or I don't know if it was an email or something. But then we're talking about it, and I explain, instead of the typical business problem where it festers, right? You're like, you feel hurt. You might not have any way to give feedback that really has teeth, that in how these rads do. And especially if your boss is, he's the person in charge, and so what are you going to do? That sort of thing. And then, months later you bring it up, and then the guy's like, oh, I didn't even know I steamrolled you, that sort of thing. And the idea then is that, let's say there is that blog, some of those people are going to contribute more than others.
Yes.
And in our case, what we're trying to do is adapt the system where, there's equal power, but there's unequal assignment of a contribution. So if I recognize that you, Blake, have done an amazing job this week, I may give you all my rads. But then next week, I didn't hear from you, or next week I didn't hear from Matt. So, I don't give anyone rads.
Yep.
And so rads is just the name for this. It could be units or kudos or whatever it is. But we're super fascinated by the idea of democratizing this stuff in a way that here in your company, we're talking about the hard asset itself.
Yeah.
It's not the management. It's not, things like that. The other thing too is, so like you have Sequoia Capital, and they're a VC fund.
Yep.
And so the buyer is an institutional investor. And the person selling is someone who wants to sell a fraction of their startup. And Sequoia acts as the mediator, the platform in between, in a very boutique way. Obviously, Flippa is attempting more of a true platform.
Yeah.
But one of the things Sequoia talks about is serendipities between companies. And they want to purchase companies that can be integrated parts of an ecosystem for what they've already bought.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, when you're looking at companies, and obviously digital is one specialization.
Yeah.
But how much more do you think about how do we add this company to the platform? Like what motivates that?
Right.
Yeah, really good question. So we're very democratic in that approach. So long as the asset can be validated, verified for quality, and quality is a function of data. We don't want someone to buy something that isn't as it seems.
Yeah.
Then, clearly we're a democratic and open marketplace that gives people access. We have some certain policies around what you can and can't list. But the question you've posed and the approach that, say, the Sequoia analogy you have used is actually quite similar to the way individuals consider opportunities. So, for example, and again, it's not necessarily, in this particular case, it's not necessarily about democratizing business ownership, but we had a tattooist, right? So he owned a tattoo parlor. As we know, people walk in, they sit down on the bed there, and he starts doing his art. Now he went and bought a blog about tattooing on Flippa. So he buys his first ever digital asset for not very much money because it offers him synergy and better ability to own his own audience and drive, obviously, foot traffic into his physical parlor. Now, the concept of buying synergistic assets is very, very common in that regard. They don't have to be the same business model, but you want, shared category or shared topic base.
But the difference is that Flippa is allowing individuals or supporting individuals to do this. And
Yes.
the thing about Sequoia is there's a lot of secrecy. I know about this company. I know about this company. And yes, they can play together. And maybe I'll tell the owners of the company, the operators of the company. And you're saying, no. It's individuals. They're doing tattoos. They want to get a tattoo plug or whatever it is. And they may get another company that does tattoo equipment. I don't know anything about tattoos, but that is selling something about tattoos and stuff like that. That is based on Amazon kind of thing. So there's similarity, but it's hugely different because it brings it down.
Yes, the expertise is devolved to the most important person, which in this case is the purchaser themselves.
Yes.
If a middleman's deciding what's good for you, they may guess wrong or right. And you may guess wrong or right as well, but usually the person with the most expertise is the one you actually want to listen to.
Yeah, and the other thing about this is you can pick and choose whether the existing business owner retains some equity, right? So you actually, when you buy an asset on Flippa, there's a discussion that plays out, and you often see someone say, "Look, I just want to invest in a digital asset, but I'd like you to stay on and share in the upside," right? So it's genuinely democratic in that way because it's a two-way exchange of information. But yes, people are obviously doing it because they believe in the asset's capability and potential. But there's no secrecy. It's completely democratized.
So I like that transparency. I think we have to wrap up.
I'm going to jump in because he's got to leave and we got to wrap up. Next week's guest is Bindu Kalesan, a founder of Turi Health. And she's going to tell us about transparent, safe data exchange platform for people to share their health data, which people are very paranoid about. So anyways, this was really good. Really,
this was really edifying. I really liked it.
I didn't know what to expect because,
that's half the fun.
And but I'm glad we did. I'm glad we got together and let us know how we can help you promote and stuff like that, and we'll be happy to. Okay, and I know you got to run, so.
Thanks so much. I'm just for everyone's context, 6:30 a.m. here in Australia, so I've got to run to get on an aeroplane. But thank you so much for the time to chat. It's a great topic.
All right.
Ciao.
Bye.